for joining our webinar today on UiPath's Document Understanding. My name is Ahmed Zaidi. I'm your host today. I am excited to have Daniel Lerner, who's the lead from the sales engineering team at UiPath, along with me. Just as by way of introduction, Accelirate is a service provider that is a diamond partner with UiPath. We've been working with them very closely, and especially on the document understanding product. Daniel and I have worked for at least now for 3-4 years together. Daniel, if you could just give a quick introduction to yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Ahmed. So everyone, Daniel Lerner, as Ahmed mentioned, I'm a sales engineer here at UiPath. I've been focusing specifically on document understanding and AI Center for AI-related products. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Been working with the Accelerate team for a while. They've been doing great stuff with document understanding. This will be a great webinar to talk document processing in general, but also really get into the workings of document understanding.
Perfect. So we'll get right into it. Look, I think OCR has been around for quite a while. From our experience, we've seen that process automation focus and the RPA focus in the industry kind of gave a new life to whole document processing, because so many processes require start at a document or have some document in between. There's all this talk about RPA, document processing, AI, computer vision, OCR. People use the words alternatively, OCR and document processing. I think it would be good for us to just quickly go through what we mean when we say document understanding as opposed to OCR, as opposed to the other technologies, and how it actually all gels together. Daniel, you want to give our audience a quick understanding of what document understanding really means? Pardon the pun.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So the way that we UiPath kind of think about document understanding is, as you can see here with this visual, right? It's the intersection of document processing, artificial intelligence, and RPA, in the sense that you're able to use artificial intelligence tools, machine learning, in conjunction with RPA, to go ahead and streamline your document processing initiatives and use cases. And that's the key differentiator between, one of the things that Ahmed mentioned is it's not just OCR, it's not just computer vision, in the sense that OCR is one aspect of document understanding. Computer vision is a little bit different, but document understanding is really going to encompass the end-to-end document processing, where you pick up the document, you're able to go through, digitize, and carry it all the way through, inputting the information from the document into some kind of end system or source of truth where you need to get that data into.
Perfect. So at the start of all our webinars, what I tend to do is we're going to be using a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology. I just want to, for everyone's sake, give a quick color on the terms we might use within the webinar and what that really means. And I'm going to go through this very quickly, not going to spend too much time on it. We're going to go through document types. We're going to talk through structured documents, semi-structured document, unstructured documents. So you can read on the screen what it is, but structured documents have some sort of structure to it. The structure may vary, however, it has some sort of a structure to it. Passports, licenses, timesheets, those are structured things that have a format and can contain text or something like that. Semi-structured documents generally have some structure to them, some unstructured: invoices, receipts, purchase orders. Again, varying in structure, however, they have some structure. They're semi-structured documents. They don't always follow the same structure. Although they contain the same data, they might have some structured information, some unstructured information in it, variable parts, tables, things like that. Unstructured documents are completely unstructured, as the name defines it. Contracts, agreements, emails, just free format things. There's no fixed format to it. You have to read through it. Those are unstructured documents. We'll talk sometimes about OCR. OCR, again, I liken OCR versus document understanding really to OCR is the computer's ability to read text from an image. When documents are brought in, generally they're scanned and they're in an image format. The computer needs to convert that image into machine readable text. which is the OCR technology. The OCR technology looks at an image of an L or an O or an E or an F and makes it into a machine readable text. That's what OCR is. OCR is just converting the text that you see in an image into text that a machine can read. A machine learning model, we'll talk a lot about machine learning models. People talk about it, AI, machine learning model. A machine learning model is pretty much a program that is trained, and we'll talk about what that training means, but I don't want to dwell on training, that is trained to recognize patterns. It's basically a program that's trained to recognize patterns, and it's then used to show something and say, do you recognize this pattern, and can you tell me what's on it? So I'd make a prediction based off of it. So that's a machine learning model. The output of a machine learning model, along with its prediction, is what's called a confidence score. A confidence score is the likelihood that the model is saying this, the program tells you the likelihood of this thing being correct, of what you're asking for, is generally represented by a confidence score. We'll spend a lot of time on confidence score by itself, but that's basically an output of a machine learning model along with its prediction of what you're asking, its own confidence in that prediction that it's the correct prediction. All right, so in the vein of talking about the various components and the various terminology we're going to use, UiPath platform is a very comprehensive platform on build, manage, engage, and discover automations. Daniel, if you could just talk through very quickly a few of the components of the platform that are involved in document understanding projects, it would be really helpful.
Yeah, happy to. So on the left, there is the UiPath platform and all the different categories that we kind of group the different services and components into. And in each of those categories, discover, build, manage, and engage, and run, there are different components. The ones that we generally see tied to document processing use cases are document understanding, the document understanding toolkit, but also the ones listed here on the right, where you have AI Center, which is going to be, where users, developers, clients can go in and actually create or utilize machine learning models that we have pre-trained to go ahead and start processing documents, as well as retrain those models to learn from human validation that may have occurred in one of our other platform components called Action Center, where business users are actually able to go in, provide input into an end-to-end process, and then pass that information back to the execution agents, the UiPath robots. And those are going to be the main ones you see in production in conjunction with Orchestrator. Orchestrator is going to be helping, is a central component that helps organize communication between different services, different platform components like the robots and Action Center. And then lastly, we have UiPath Studio, which was one of our core RPA tools and one of our first products. This is where developers are going to be able to actually create automations with a very user-friendly, low-code, no-code development environment. And that's where you'll be able to actually build out the automations that say, hey, for these kinds of documents, I want to go ahead and process them using this machine learning model. I want to go ahead and process them using this OCR engine or this classification method. And then at this certain decision point, I want to go ahead and send this document to Action Center for someone to validate. Or if I pass this, a certain confidence threshold, which we'll get into later on, I want to go ahead and just send it straight to my downstream system where I'm plugging that information into. All of these components is really kind of what we see bundled into these document processing solutions. You're still able to use other platform components that are listed here in the flywheel on the left, but these are one of the more popular ones that we see utilized.
Perfect. Let's go through. I think there's a lot of different things to discuss. What I wanted to start with today is let's start with the end picture first, and then we go into how do we get here, right? So the idea is that in any document processing in anything that involves processing a document, the first step is to retrieve the document and do some pre-processing. Is this the right thing? Is this, where is it coming from? So on and so forth. That's just pre-processing of the data before you even look at what's inside this document, right? What mailbox is it from? Take it from the mailbox, put it on a share folder, rename the document, whatever that may be, mark in some system that it's being worked on, so on and so forth. Then we get into the actual looking at the document itself, right? So somebody looks at the document, which is the classification of, so the automation then classifies the document, which is, what is this document? And we'll talk a little bit more about it. There are multiple options there, ML models or keywords, right? So once the document's been classified, the next step is extraction of data from that document. So which is the key core thing that you're trying to do, is look at the document, figure out what data is on the document. And the idea is always to take that information and put it into some system of record, right? The extraction of data happens in document understanding projects in the UiPath through ML model, generally speaking. There are the methods, but we'll mostly be focusing on the ML model today, and then processing the data in the system of record. In between all of this, as the automation is doing this, there are certain, because we use non-deterministic models of figuring out certain things, right? So if this then that is a very clear binary. If the name of the document is this, do this. If it follows this pattern of text, do this. If you find this text on this document, then do this. That's a pretty binary thing. As we spoke about earlier in ML models do a prediction as along with its confidence score along with this prediction. So you might need to do some validation, and there are different ways to figure out what that validation is. If a validation is needed, then you have a human in the loop that does that classification validation. Did the machine validate did the machine classify this document properly? And if it didn't, let's classify it so it can go on to the next step. And same thing with the extraction. We'll talk through how to look at machine extracted data and validate it, but there might be a need to validate that data. So there's a human involved to validate that data extraction. And those are sort of exception cases that happen, and the platform is designed to help you do all of that. So it's an all-encompassing platform that helps you validate and extract the data. Key thing to keep in mind is that when we talk about document processing automation, there's always, almost always an involvement of a human. So this is not one of those batch jobs that you can just deploy and forget and leave, and you don't need any humans to do this anymore. So there's always this human aspect involved in this validation of this data. When is validation needed? As I spoke about, classification methods cannot classify the document definitively. ML model may predict a low score. The extracted data might violate a business rule or data check. You might be saying, "Hey, listen, I want to look up a customer name to see to check the customer name against my system of record, and if it doesn't match, you need to figure out what to do with it." So those are business rule data check violations that might need a human to chime in to actually correct the data or figure out what that right data should be. So this is sort of in a nutshell, very quickly, what the end flow looks like. Let's go through a little bit of how this flow translates to what happens within the platform. And I'm going to hand this over to Daniel to explain through how these how this fits into the different components that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, thanks. So I just went through kind of the high level flow. We're gonna go through and just walk through a couple of examples of documents, going through each of those steps, and go a little bit more in depth on how we see all those different components fitting together, and how we might respond to different document types that are being processed, such as semi-structured and structured, 2 of the 3 document types that we often see in document processing use cases. If we just start with 3 document types, so an organization is looking to process invoices, purchase orders, and receipts, we would generally consider what we generally see is, invoices and purchase orders, highly variable in terms of format and layout from sample to sample. You're not going to have a use case often where all of your vendors or customers that you're receiving invoices or POs from follow the exact same format and layout. So having a solution that accommodates that variation is going to be important. And because there is that variation, but generally the same pieces of information need to be found on each sample, we kind of categorize those as semi-structured documents. Receipt requests, here we're imagining a scenario where it's a very structured form. We know what we're going to be getting in this document when we start processing it based on the information being in an expected position or being next to a certain reference that we can always count on to actually process those receipt requests. And this is where we start getting into the different steps of how we start processing, how a UiPath document understanding solution would start processing these different document types. We would have a UiPath Studio process. So UiPath Studio was that development environment where someone created an automation in that development environment to go ahead and start reading all these different attachments or documents from an inbox, or this could be a SharePoint or a shared drive. Those attachments are accessed by a UiPath robot, and they start to get read in and go through the different document processing steps that we have to actually prepare to extract information from those documents. The first is actually digitizing or running the document through an OCR engine. And you're able to utilize, so within the UiPath platform, you can pick and choose from a variety of OCR engines. You're able to utilize, one that the UiPath product engineering team has built and created and iterated on to improve over time and continues to. You can also use other third-party OCR engines that we integrate with in order to see which one gives you the best results when it comes to grabbing or taking that image or that scanned PDF and converting that image into digital text, into a block of text that can then be used further downstream to, one, classify the actual document, identify, this block of text, if this image that I just read in is actually an invoice, or if it's a purchase order, or if it's a receipt, or and also extract information from that document. So once we actually have that input document classified, we're able to then tell the robot, go ahead, and now that this is a receipt request, go ahead and pass it to our form extractor, which is going to be a more rules-based approach for processing information from forms, from structured documents. This is where we see templates being created, rules being created to very strictly define how we expect to process this document. After that information is extracted, we see post-processing and business rules come into play. And this is where we start to apply, the robot applies your business's decision logic for how you want to handle human validation or downstream processing. Meaning you have the ability to create a suite of your own post-processing and business rules outside of the ones that we may already provide by default, and specify to the robot, based on the outcome of those post-processing and business rules, if the document should be sent for automated data entry, where it gets sent right into your ERP system or downstream applications, or if it needs to be sent to human validation for a team member to take action on. In the scenario that we see the document being sent for automated data entry, this is what we call straight-through processing or no-touch processing, where a human user or no business user had to actually see the document to process it. The robot was able to process it end-to-end without any human intervention. In some scenarios, you may have a document like an invoice go through the steps, and once those business rules are applied, we may require some human validation. And before I get into that, the invoice that we see here, I mentioned, is a semi-structured document. With semi-structured documents, we wanted to handle that variation. And that variation often requires us to use what we call an ML skill, which is just another term, a UiPath specific term for a machine learning model that's been deployed and made available for usage to actually start receiving predictions from. And how we create machine learning models is through that platform component that I mentioned called AI Center, where you're able to actually go in and create a training data set for the model to learn from. So a batch of samples of invoices that have been processed historically in an organization, they can take those invoices, they can label them, and then they can use that training data set as well as what we call a model schema, which is just going to be the list of fields or pieces of information that you want the model to look for. These are going to be tied to your business requirements. So for invoices, most likely you would want to process things like invoice number, invoice date, PO number, the line items, quantity, unit price, and line amount maybe. All of those will be defined in the model schema. And those two inputs are going to allow you to train a machine learning model. And that machine learning model can then be applied to samples, regardless of their format and layout. And it's going to, hopefully what we expect with high confidence, go ahead and start processing information from those invoices and providing predictions back to the robot to then go ahead and use to apply those post-processing and business rules to determine if information is matching what we expected, or if it needs to be sent to a team member or team members to go ahead and take a second look at. And all the while documents are being processed or kind of in this queue for human users to take action on, other documents can still be worked on by your team of robots or by your execution agents. And those documents, semi-structured or structured, will go through the same steps. They'll go through the classification step, they'll go through the extraction step, and they'll be able to make a determination as to whether they need human intervention or they can be straight through processed. Once a team member takes a look at this queue of exceptions that they need to provide some input on, they will be able to confirm, correct, and validate those results and send that information downwards back to the robot to keep processing. And one of the benefits of the document understanding toolkit here is with each data point or each exception that's handled with that human validation step, when you're using a machine learning model to process those documents in AI Center, you can take that data point and it's going to be stored and used to actually retrain the model. And you're able to take that data point and add it into the model's training data set so that when a new model version gets created, it's going to be able to learn from its mistakes, or it's going to have additional knowledge and insight into how you process that specific document type and those specific pieces of information that you're looking for from sample to sample. I'll take a pause here real quick. I think we're good to go to the next slide, but Ahmed, anything you want to add on to the previous slide?
I think this is a very, very good and deep explanation. I think that the technical folks on the webinar will relate to this. If you haven't done a UDU project, this is how it's done. But I think this is great to give people a sense of what the we keep talking about human in the loop and you're allowed to do classification. This is a visual of the classification station, which is basically a UI where somebody can go in and take a look at it and say, okay, these 10 pages, this document was classified as a financial report, or these 10 pages within a document were identified as a financial report as opposed to some other extraneous information, so on and so forth. This is a visual, so people can visualize what a classification station looks like. This is where the user goes in to actually validate the classification when the classification might be fuzzy, because it is a fuzzy sort of machine learning model, or any other type of model that you might be using. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do classification, but we wanted to give people a classification station view and a validation station view, right? The same thing that you do for the classification station, the validation station helps you there as well. Daniel, anything I missed there? Or
yeah, oh no, that's great. And the one thing I'll add here is, so both of these are the interfaces where business users get involved in the document processing step. There are some other areas where you can involve business users with custom interfaces. These are the two interfaces that UiPath team develops and kind of makes available to teams to go ahead and complete any validation on the classification step or the extraction step, where a machine learning model or a template or some other kind of extraction method has actually pulled information out of the document and is ready to process the information, but a business rule may have flagged one of the values for not matching the purchase order that's tied to the invoice, or a business rule may have been flagged because that information, that address, wasn't found in your source of truth. This is where business users will have that information presented to them to go ahead and validate quickly so they can keep processing the information downstream.
Perfect. So the next thing that we want to talk about is, we've talked about, now at this point, we've talked about what the end state looks like, right? We've talked about the how the processing happened, what's the end state, how do you get there, right? I think this was one of the big things. My impetus for the thought behind the webinar was, we talked to a lot of customers and a lot of prospects, and even people who actually have implemented UiPath and are starting to get into the document processing areas within their automation program. One is to understand what the end state looks like, but I think more importantly, let's spend the next half hour sort of really talking about, how do we get there, right? What are the steps that need to happen to get to that end state of being able to process documents in an automated fashion, and what are the different steps there? So I think from an implementation standpoint, there are multiple steps, right? So there are some analysis steps, some technical steps, so on and so forth. I'll just go through some of those high-level steps, and then we'll go into each one of these individually and talk through some of the details and nuances of each one of these. So first, of course, from a business use case standpoint, you need to determine what the document types that you're going to process, and figure out what fields that you're going to need for those fields. But the first thing is, first figure out what documents that you need to process. Then we need to figure out, how are we going to classify these documents, and what is the method we're going to use to classify these documents. And there's some analysis that goes into it. You have multiple ways to do that, and we'll talk through what document classification looks like. After you've done that, for each document that you want to process, you're going to define a taxonomy for the document, which really is a bunch of fields that are on the document that you want to extract. Then the next step is training of the ML data extraction model, and we'll spend a lot of time on it, but recognize that that's a very crucial step in implementation of a DU project, and we'll talk a lot more about it. But then after you've figured out all these fields in these documents, you need to train the model, and we'll talk about what the training really means. Train the model to extract data. Once you have trained the model, what you need to say is, you need to validate the model performance, and based on that validation step, you might see that the model has learned some things really well and might not have learned other things well, and you need to retrain the model, or reinforce, or provide it more data so it can make that pattern, right? So we talked about the machine learning model as a program that recognizes patterns. Basically, it hasn't recognized a pattern, so you need to retrain for those things. Once you've retrained it and you're happy with the execution and the validation of the model performance, you deploy that to production, and we monitor how it's working in production. And as Daniel had mentioned in the previous workflow, you retrain the model continuously based on the data collected from the human validation step that we have. So you continue to see some data validation, or some low confidence scores on some fields, or some data violations. You'll be able to retrain the model and also put in more rules to avoid those things. And we'll go through each one of these things in detail. So let's talk about document classification. You have two, again, as mentioned many times, you have a multi-page document. You need to figure out if there are invoices, purchase orders, receipts, and unrelated documents within that multi-page document. Your options are, you can use a machine learning based classification model, which really tries to determine a pattern after you have taught it a few of these documents, or a keyword based model, which is, look for this particular keyword on a document, and if that exists on that document, it is this type of a document. There's some interesting preview functionality and some other details on this that I have glossed over. I'm going to hand it to Daniel to talk through some of those things and talk a little bit about document classification.
Yeah, sure. So classification is one of the key steps, with right now, with document processing use cases. When you have a multi-page document, you can use the classifiers in the toolkit to not only say, hey, what is this document classified as? Is it an invoice? Is it a purchase order? Is it a receipt, for example? But you can also use what we call splitting capabilities that actually allow you to make a determination of, hey, are there multiple document types in this one input PDF? And can I go ahead and take this multi-page PDF and split it up accordingly into each of the respective document types, where pages 1 and 2 might be an invoice, page 3 might be a purchase order, page 4 is a receipt, and the remaining pages are all unrelated documents. So we have some, some rules, but some capabilities right now to perform that document splitting, and we're also adding in some machine learning model, some ML based splitting capabilities in the future. With currently a feature in private preview. So if you do encounter a use case that requires this kind of capability, if that's something, and you're testing out the rules-based version, that's something you can also begin to explore with our private preview, or wait until it's out in public preview or in generally available.
Perfect. Talk about taxonomy a little bit. Daniel, if you could
Yeah.
walk through what taxonomy, document taxonomy, and what the fields mean. We talked about taxonomy of the documents and the fields. If you could talk through this, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So taxonomy is going to be where you start creating the catalog of documents that you want to process, right? With any document processing use case, stakeholders are going to ask, hey, we have these documents we need processed, and these are the specific pieces of information we need from those documents in order to actually successfully submit or process that document. The taxonomy is going to be where you define those business requirements for all of those document types. So you're able to actually create categories and start creating or defining all the different document types you expect to process, like receipt, invoices, or sales orders, which you see here. And then for each of those document types, you'll list out the specific piece of information that you need from the document, as well as other pieces of information that may not be present on the document, but are tied to the business process, and you might want someone to provide manually via human in the loop capabilities in Action Center, or via their a custom application that you create. So this is going to be the key component for allowing robots and the UiPath solution to understand what are your business requirements. That's really the key thing with the taxonomy.
Perfect. All right, now to the fun stuff. Training a machine learning model. I think this is something we talk about this a lot, and there seems to be there's always a question around, hey, what does this training mean? And you talk about, hey, there's some pre-trained models, there are some untrained models, custom training models. We'll start at the basics first. Daniel, why don't we go through what it really means to train a model? What does training a model mean?
Yeah, sure thing. So training a model is going to be, first, hey, I have this entity that I'm going to provide some input into, and it really first initially requires just data. We need some kind of data for the model to actually learn from, and that's going to be the training aspect. The learning and training are pretty interchangeable, in the sense that we want to create a model that is educated enough, knowledgeable enough about the documents that we are processing, that we expect it to make predictions or provide output with high confidence, and as a result, with high accuracy. Those two are different concepts, confidence and accuracy, but we generally see them, pretty correlated, where if you have high confidence, you're more likely to have higher accuracy in your end-to-end processing. So that's the basic right now. And the key thing, that one of the key things we'll get into, is how we actually start preparing that data correctly and with best practice for the model to optimally learn the most it can from the data we're providing.
Perfect. So I think, so in here you have the preparation of the data and verification and validation of the data as well. So I, personally speaking, I'm a if this then that type of programming guy, right? I came from that background, and they're like, all right, well, somebody says, hey, listen, I need to figure out whether this where to find invoice number on this document. I say, hey, I'm going to write 20 if statements that say if the text is preceded by INV pound, INV colon, invoice, factura, whatever that is, right? That will be the thing. But the way one of the machine earlier on into machine learning, what somebody explained it to me was like, hey, no, that doesn't have no rules here, right? It's the way you learn how to identify a car. If you think through your childhood, nobody actually ever gave you the rules on how to define a car. Nobody ever said a car is a thing that drives on the road and has four wheels and has this and that and doors. They just pointed to a car and told you that was a car, and they pointed to another car and they pointed to another car, and then you realize sometimes it has four doors, sometimes it has two doors, sometimes it's a convertible, sometimes it's not, and what things are important to identify a car versus what things are not important as identification methods of what makes a car, right? So that's kind of really important to understand, that what you're trying to do is you're trying to give a model enough samples so it can, in its own programming, figure out the pattern to get to a certain piece of data that you're trying to get to, right? And I think that there's something interesting that Daniel, that you mentioned. You mentioned confidence and accuracy, and we'll go into the confidence score thing. The thing is, confidence score is the model's own confidence in its prediction. The model says, I think 90% this is the right thing. Accuracy is whether that thing is the right thing or not is really the measure of accuracy. The model said, I predict that the invoice number is 1562, whereas the invoice number was 1564. The prediction may be very confident, the accuracy is not, right? So that's the difference between the two. And what it means in really a document processing context is a human labeling fields on a document. So at least in the extraction model perspective, even for the classification, in classification, it's not labeling a field, it's labeling a page to say this page is an invoice and this page is a receipt. Labeling documents so that the ML model can learn how to extract data or classify those documents. I think that's a very very important concept to understand. And by the way, all ML models are sort of pre-wired for retraining. So you can retrain the ML models over and over again to say, hey, listen, this was the initial set that you were trained on. Here's some new samples, whether that be for the reasons of new type of documents, new variations of documents appearing, or you're seeing that the accuracy and confidence are veering away from each other, or any of the other reasons that you retrain the model continuously for optimal performance. And I think that's really important. So we introduced another concept just now. We said labeling fields on a document, right? But we'll go through that labeling. But I think before we do that, let's talk through, we talk about ML-based data extraction options. And Daniel, there's a lot of talk about pre-trained models and so on and so forth. So why don't you go through and give our audience a good sense of what are the different extraction options and what they really mean, and when you explain it to your customers, what those options mean.
Yeah, sure thing. So we can break down the different options when it comes to model-based extraction in three buckets. So the first is, what do we UiPath provide out of the box, pre-trained for you to start utilizing? And pre-trained just means, we have created this machine learning model to process a specific document type, like invoices, like receipts, like purchase orders, and they have a defined schema or set of information, set of fields that they have been configured to look for. And we often see these being used great in initial pilots or POCs to really start to see how well to really start to see what the floor is of your processing, because you want to be able to see how this out of the box capability works on the documents that you process, such as invoices or any of the different document types that you see listed here. And then you're able to go ahead and actually perform what we call retraining on those document types. And that retraining really falls in two categories. One is going to be custom, and one is going to be pre-trained plus custom, meaning you're able to take any of the different models that we provide out of the box and adjust accordingly the model schema or that list of requirements based on your business needs. So I can take the UiPath invoices model and say, well, I want all of these fields that the out-of-the-box model supports, but I also want to be able to add on these 3 additional fields that are unique to my business requirements. And with that, you're able to actually retrain this out-of-the-box invoices model on your historical samples, your historical invoices, and it's going to be able to not only learn about invoices that are specific to your company, your organization, your team, but also it will be able to understand and learn about those 3 specific pieces of information that you had defined in your business requirements. And in the middle sits here a purely custom machine learning model, which is where you're able to actually, it might not match the document type, might not match one of the ones listed on the lower left here for one of the out-of-the-box document type models that we provide. You're still able to go in and utilize the platform to build a custom model schema, to go ahead and label documents and train a machine learning model so that now you have a custom document understanding model that will process your document type that you need information extracted from. And that's one of the benefits of document understanding, is that even though you might not have something available, you might not have something out of the box, or it might not be completely in line with your business requirements, you can either take what we have out of the box, modify it accordingly to fit what you need, or you can even start from scratch and really define that custom schema as needed, but still get the benefit of a very powerful machine learning model that is going to handle the variation and the volume that you need to process.
Perfect. So we talked about quite a bit of labeling documents here, right? So what does that really mean, right? Labeling documents. So it's very simple, right? It's you have a document on the left-hand side, you have a set of fields from the schema that you defined, and a human goes through these documents on the left-hand side, clicks somewhere and clicks a key. In this case, it's A for date, right? And says this piece of text here is date, right? This piece of text here is PO number. This piece of text here is invoice number. And you can see all the regular fields on the right-hand side, so on and so forth. UiPath provides data manager that allows you to do this data labeling. It's out of the box. You have the ability to manage a lot of this data labeling exercise right out of the platform. Daniel, if you could talk a little bit about data manager, what the functionality is in there, what data sets, batches, training versus evaluation sets mean.
Yeah, sure. So data manager, as I mentioned, is where team members are actually able to go in and label data. And this is just going to be us defining a couple of things. It's going to be defining where the information that we want the model to start learning from is present on the sample documents that we may have collected that have historically been processed. So all of those pieces of information you see on the right, name, vendor address, billing address, that is our model schema. And then the actual labeling process that I mentioned is specifying what piece of information on that document in the middle with all the gray boxes highlighted is each of those particular fields. Once that label or highlight has been added, that is going to be a document sample the model can learn from. And this set of samples that we provide for the model to learn from is often added as what we call a batch. So we create these batches in Document Manager for the model to learn from, and we can define those batches as either training data for the model to learn from, and also even evaluation data for the model to be tested against. So we're able to go ahead and specify, hey, here is a set of data I want you to learn from. Here's all of the information for vendor address and name and all of these different pieces of these fields. And then I want you to go ahead and use this second set of labeled data to test how well you know these documents. And Data Manager allows you to perform the labeling exercise required to create both of those data sets so that you can accurately and efficiently determine if the model that you just trained with this batch of data is performing up to what you need to process these documents when you actually want to roll that out closer to production.
Perfect. One of the questions that always comes up is, who's going to do this data labeling? How long does it take? Right? So who does it, Daniel?
Yeah, so data labeling can be done by anyone to begin, but usually what we see in customer implementations is it's people who are most closely aligned with the document, who know the most about the documents that are being processed. You most likely will see a document subject matter expert being involved or a process subject matter expert being involved, and providing or performing that labeling to make sure that it's done as accurately as possible, to make sure that we're accurately helping the model learn about the documents as opposed to learning the wrong things about each of the pieces of information that might impact accuracy in the end-to-end.
Yep. I think that's a very interesting thing, Daniel, right? The people who actually understand, pun intended here, right? Understand the document are probably the best people to say, hey, this is where this custom field appears, right? Or this custom piece of data that I'm trying to label appears. Sometimes, and again, how long does it take? Depending upon how many fields you're doing, it can take anywhere from, you know, a minute to 5 minutes, depending on how big the document is. A few minutes is really usually the time it takes. For our engagement, sometimes when it's only training on some custom fields that are not performed, that are either very evident, right? So it's like, oh, okay, here it says this label right here, and that's the custom field. We're able to do some of those things. But then when you get into other languages and other different type of regional variations, the SMEs that actually understand these documents are generally the best ones to figure out and actually label those documents. Now, the question always is, how many documents need to be labeled? So Daniel, this is the tough question. I'm punting it to you.
Yeah, sure. So it's not a simple answer of, hey, every single use case is going to require X number of documents to be labeled. There are some factors that go into how we determine how many documents need to be labeled to really accomplish the goal of how do we create a model that is performing at a high level. And those factors are going to be based on a few things. One is the actual document type. So if it's one of the out-of-the-box document types that we support, that's going to assist in the number of samples that we might need initially, as well as how many pieces of information the model needs to learn about. The more pieces of information, the more fields required for the model to support, the more labels it most likely will need to actually just make sure it has enough learning about each of those pieces of information. And then lastly, any variation or number of languages is going to also help us understand, or help you understand, how many documents might need to be labeled as well, in addition to the variation that is present. So the number of layouts or the amount of variation across a use case, where if you know you really only see, you know, this format or this layout, the number of format or layouts in this use case being 3 or 4 or 5, then the variation is pretty low and the model is not going to need as many samples to really start to understand the documents intelligently. But if there are hundreds and thousands of different variations, you want to make sure that you provide the model a representative sample of what you're processing potentially in production, and you want to make sure you provide enough breadth for the model to learn from so that it can accommodate to variations that it has not seen or it has not been trained on. And one of the benefits, these are a lot of things to take into consideration. So one of the benefits of what we provide is, within our platform, we provide an area where you can provide these inputs, and we'll actually tell you or give you a recommended data set size. And we'll tell you, hey, based on what you provided for your use case, this is what we expect you to need in order to create an initial high performing model to start processing documents.
No, that's very helpful, and that's I think that's one of the newer features that's been released recently, Daniel.
Yeah.
In prep for this, I was like, oh, this is really cool. So thank you very much for that. So again, look, I think it's very difficult to predict right off the bat when somebody says, hey, I want to process documents, how many do I need to label? It's a very difficult question to answer. So apologies to the customers who ask this question, and we always tend to give you a long-winded answer. This is the reason why, because it's not a cookie cutter straight, hey, it's either 10 documents or 5 documents or 100 documents or 500 documents. It depends. It depends on a lot on the use case. So generally speaking, we see that, even if there are just a few fields that are not performing, you can get away with 20, 50 samples of that field. But if there's a new format and a lot of variation, your number can go into hundreds or, sometimes even thousands of pages of labeling, just because the variation is so large. So that's really helpful. So now we understand what a model is. We understand what training a model means. We understand, in the context of document processing, what training a model means, which is labeling of data. Once we've done all of this, where do we go from there, right? We validate the model performance. So we've gone through labeling, we've gone through and then trained a model. And once we train the model, Daniel talked about in the data manager portion of it, he briefly mentioned an evaluation set. Generally, what you do in machine learning model training exercises, is you take a sample set of known correct data. So when you've labeled documents, that human is saying, this is, I'm saying that this is the accurate values that I want out of it. So what you do is you take a smaller subset of that and train the model on it. So maybe 80% of it might go into training the model. The rest of the 20% is actually used to validate the accuracy of that model training. So it gets trained on that data. The 20% of the data is now then used. So you give those 20% of the data is actually used. The documents are used to give to the model to make the prediction, and then it's compared against what the human said is the accurate value for that particular field. And what comes out of that is an evaluation file, which is right here, right? It gives you all the fields. It gives you the model's confidence score along with it, and it actually says, here's the actual invoice number that the person said it was, the invoice number that the model predicted it was, and what the confidence score along with that is. And this is where you go in and actually see what the accuracy of it is. So looking at the right-hand side of it, let's just take a look at that. The model actually accurately predicted the dates on the first scenario, but somehow the confidence score is low, which means, which probably needs some action to it. And so Daniel, you want to talk about how do we fix these issues when you see something like this happen?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about looking or analyzing this evaluation file, there's some things you generally want to look at. The first thing is, hey, how are my predictions in terms of accuracy? So those will be the ones marked in red or marked in yellow, where they didn't match the answer key we provided. And that's going to be where you then want to say, okay, well, what is my field level accuracy? So out of all these predictions, how well did it perform? Am I at 90%? Am I at 80%, 70%? Right? That's going to help you see if there are particularly specific fields in your list that your model is supporting that are really being the limiting factors in your straight through processing and your end-to-end efficiency. And then you'll also be able to see the specific errors row by row and start to take action on those. So you can see, okay, well, for this particular sample, why could the model have gotten the date wrong, right? Why did it think 5/19/2022 was really the date as opposed to 5/5? And it could be because the model maybe just needs additional samples to learn from. It could be because there was a labeling issue. So this is going to be where we start performing that kind of root cause analysis, or getting insight into how to perform that root cause analysis by reviewing these results.
Perfect. So basically, determine the low performing fields, label more documents is generally the solution to this, but you have to figure out why it's not performing and what needs to get done. Okay, perfect. I want to move quickly. We're almost running out of time. Once you've done that, you deploy and retrain. I'm not gonna. We've talked about this a lot, so I'm just going to go through this very quickly. When those, again, when that confidence threshold is low, or business rules are not met, all the validated data is captured and then used to retrain. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. So I'm gonna skip this in the interest of time, so that we can get into some of the interesting things that we've heard a lot from our customers. Daniel, the confidence score, we've talked about it a lot. The confidence score is the model's own confidence in its accuracy, right? So I don't think we need to belabor that. What are confidence score thresholds?
Yeah, sure. So thresholds are going to be what you as a team or what you as a development team can go in and define to say, hey, this is the level of confidence I want to make sure is reached in order to not require human validation for a field. So this is one factor that we see customers using to help determine if human validation is needed. And I think Ahmed kind of has queued up the follow-up question usually is, hey, is this the only thing that I can rely on to actually determine human validation? And the answer is no, right? We often see business rules and rules-based logic being incorporated in addition to confidence score thresholds to help determine if human validation or an exception needs to be handled. And one of the benefits of those business rules is a confidence score threshold is not going to always tell you or I'll correct that. A low confidence does not necessarily mean that something was inaccurate. It just means that the model was not as confident in its prediction and it might require you to look at it. So being able to apply business rules will give you a rules-based determination on whether a prediction was accurate or not. And if not, it should be reviewed by a team member or by a business user.
Perfect. So I think the question then happens, the next question that gets asked is, okay, well, straight through processing, what should I expect, right? So
Yeah.
Daniel, go through this a little bit quickly so we can tell people a little bit about expectation for straight through processing. And again, to reiterate, straight through processing is human doesn't need to do anything, documents get processed straight through.
Yeah. So the usual expectation is, hey, we want to establish a floor of where our model is performing. And that's where you see out of the box models being used to understand just the baseline where we're at. After that, you're able to go ahead and actually retrain the model with your sample documents. Those get labeled, you create a new model version. And generally what we see is that tailored solution performs better at processing your documents than the out of the box model did. And then you actually start to get into, I'll increase these again. You actually start to get into, okay, well, let's go ahead and actually apply post-processing and business rules to help us validate the information so that we can actually increase the straight-through processing, because we can take some of those low confident results and actually validate them with rules instead of relying on confidence thresholds. And that allows us to then increase straight-through processing and increase the efficiency. And lastly, we have fine-tuning with validated data, being able to actually retrain the model with data that's been validated by team members, allowing the model to learn from those mistakes that it previously had and continue then to actually output more accurate predictions now that it has additional data points to learn from and increase or enhance its knowledge base.
Perfect. So let's go directly into some of the, this one, be specific to your environment. I think I completely wholeheartedly agree with number two, the bullet point number two. My opinion is a little bit biased, but look, the success stories and the case studies are out there. This is a wholesale club, again, within about 10 weeks end to end of development and training. We did 93% straight through processing with a combination of business rules as well as including a bill of lading field to be trained. I think there are tons of these abound, these success stories. We just chose to pick a couple of them, and in true confidence in their own product, right? The UiPath themselves use document understanding in their AP process, which is great, right? So we practice what we preach, and both these again, we will do another session on very specifically on the success stories, but what you can expect with these success stories, generally speaking, anywhere from, I mean, even if you were able to do 50% straight through processing, you can imagine that just the efficiencies you get in not doing pre-processing and post-processing alone contribute a lot to the efficiency of the process itself. Getting in the interest of time, I'm moving into the Q&A section. I think there's a couple of interesting questions here. So I think we went through some of the in the questions. I think the first two we've answered. Suppose a digital PDF contains multiple pages with multiple invoices with the same format. How do we go extract data in one go without any loop? I think for that question, Sunil, definitely reach out to us offline. We can point you to some resources that will help you. The question is, handwritten data extraction training possible in DU and AI? Daniel?
Yeah, not right. So the training aspect, not right now. So the document understanding tool supports handwriting conversion. But that is going to be with the OCR engine that is used, that's separate from the machine learning models, where the machine learning models have a feedback loop separate from how our product team improves the handwriting machine learning model that we use to convert that handwriting into digital text.
I think the interesting thing there is I think it's more about the OCR than the AI model. I think the OCR predicts the text, and it actually then also tags the text with the coordinates and things like that, which the AI model ingests to actually figure out where things are. So technically speaking, yes, you'd be training on some handwritten stuff, but the handwriting problem is more an OCR problem than an AI training problem.
Right. Yeah. If the question is, can you create a model for documents out of handwriting? Absolutely. Yes.
Perfect. I think we answered how many documents should be labeled in other languages other than English. I think there's a whole list of supported languages. One thing to understand about other languages other than English and Spanish and some of the models, you already have, look, the three models that we discussed of being able to train a model. You have out of the blocks plus, which is you add some to it. The model can be trained on languages that the OCR supports, right? So it's just a difference of how many samples you'll need in so you won't have the model has been pre-trained on certain languages. The model has not been trained on other languages. You will need more samples to retrain that model in that particular language. What's important to understand is that the AI Center will support all the languages that the OCR engine supports. So that's important to understand.
Right.
Somebody has asked the question, does the document count functionality? Does it have any way to detect duplicate uploads? I think that's a very interesting question, Linda. One of the big exercises that you go through is collecting the sample, and I think it's important to work with your partner and even if you're working with UiPath on getting an understanding on how to collect a good representative sample. Daniel, you want to talk a little bit about how to collect a good representative sample?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about creating a representative sample data set, you want to make it as similar in proportion to what you process in production. That's going to be the closest way to get something that is representative of what you process in production for your model to learn from. And part of the inbuilt functionality in Data Manager is recognizing, hey, if I upload the same document more than once, am I going to be able to detect or avoid duplicates? That's going to be built in to make sure that you're not force feeding the more frequent, I guess, the same document over and over again. That might be causing the model to be overfit on one particular document that it might be struggling with.
I think, Daniel, I always tell folks, if you were always ever shown a red car, right, and different models of a red car, you would associate the color red with the car, right? And if you're always told that cars are red, you'd associate. Model does the same thing, right? If you showed it only one type of sample or overfit on the sample, then it'll say usually cars are red, right? that's kind of the same analogy where if you showed the model a single sample, it would overfit to that and not be able to not have a confidence score high enough on other samples. I think there's another question, which is I'm going to answer it a little differently. It was about bad scans and rejected documents. I think it's important to differentiate between OCR and scanning versus document understanding, AI, and model training. AI and model training, the OCR, what it does is the OCR depends upon the quality of the document, the quality of the scan, dots per inch, all that good stuff. Good OCR results will generally tend to perform better than others, which means you're not mistaking, B's for 8s and O's for 0s and L's and all those tricky things that happen with a badly scanned, which is humans make those mistakes as well, right? Because they're just the scan wasn't. That part is a pre-processing part to the training of the model. The training of the model is what the model takes in is the output of the OCR. What the OCR gives you is takes the document and says, I see this text here. And if you actually look at the output of a underlying output of an OCR, it's, this text appears here. This is the block. These are the coordinates. This is how big it is. These are all the characters in this block, so on and so forth. The model takes that output and then creates the patterns out of it to say, either I can see that these are the patterns of what you're telling me where data is. So it's important to understand that OCR and machine learning and AI, sort of machine learning training of a model is different than just OCR. We're actually 8 minutes over. I wanted to answer some of these questions. There were still a few attendees in. We really thank you for attending. Our information is readily available either on LinkedIn, or feel free to reach out to myself, my first name dot last name at accelerate.com. Daniel is daniel.lerner at UiPath.com. Thank you very much, Daniel. We really appreciate it. I had an amazing time. I hope you did as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for everything. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.